there, welcome to Hardware Heaven. I'm Stuart and today we're going to be taking a look at the XMG P703 gaming laptop. This is a 17.3 inch system, meant to be a desktop replacement really, and based around Haswell, so 4th gen i7, has GTX 770, that's Kepler based graphics in it, and a whole whack of RAM as well as a decent SSD and things like that. So we will be testing the platform out, things like SSD speed, USB 3 speed, looking at some of the CPU performance, and also looking at some of the gaming performance as well in things like Grid 2, Metro Last Light, Tomb Raider, and showing you some performance from that, so recorded footage from this, and just to see how well it runs or doesn't run, and taking a look around and inside the laptop as well. So let's get on with it. So this is the external top surface of the XMG P703 gaming laptop. It's a soft touch matte coating on the top here, and just a few ridges down the side, which actually I'm not entirely sure if you can see very well on the camera, but they are slightly stuck up from the top of the surface. Just gives it that little extra bit of detail when there's no logo or anything along the top there. There's some extra detailing along the front here, and you can see just up at this front corner there is a couple of status LEDs for power, battery and charging, things like that. Turning around to the left of the system, we have the optical drive. In this it's a DVD drive at the moment, but you can get Blu-ray readers and writers. There are 4 3.5mm audio ports on here, and next to them a USB 2.0 port. Turning along to the back surface, starts with a Kensington lock slot, and we've got a vent here for exhausting air out, and then our connectors start with a DisplayPort 1.2, then we have HDMI 1.4, mini DisplayPort 1.2, and the power input, along with another vent for air. So all the air in this system is exhausted out the back, none from the sides, none from underneath, it's coming straight out the back. Turning around to the left hand side, mini firewire, gigabit LAN, 2 USB 3.0 ports, an eSATA port which is a combo port with USB 3.0, and a 9-in-1 card reader. If we turn the system over, you can see there are various different panels on the bottom. So one here, another one up here. This is all one panel at the top here, and the battery down here just unlocks by flicking the switches. And then this is a pretty standard battery size for this type of laptop. It's made by Simplo, and you can see the ratings on there. So this laptop also has the subwoofer just over on the left hand side there, and the measurements for this are 41.4 centimeters across the way, 28.6 going back, and it's got a height of 4.6 centimeters when it's closed. The weight is around 4.1 kilograms with the battery. So, opening it up, we've got a multi-zone backlit keyboard. There is the standard model which has no backlight, but this one has backlighting. The touchpad is also backlit, and the power button up to the right hand side is backlit as well. There's actually a bar here where we have the LEDs for like caps lock and Wi-Fi and things like that, but there's also a section in the middle here which you can't see at the moment but will see later, which has various different, it's almost like a graphic equalizer graphic there, and as the sound's coming through the speakers, the speaker bar is just along there, and the lights light up depending on the amount of sound that you're coming through. So if there's sound coming from the left start to light up, and the right, basic kind of pretty self-explanatory when you see it. Touchpad down here has multi-gesture and scrolling function. We've got the fingerprint reader in the middle of the two mouse buttons here, and you can see there's the Sound Blaster X53 logo on the sticker here, which we'll look at in a moment. So that's it pretty much for the external area of the laptop. Actually, just a quick look at the screen first. So this is a 17.3 inch screen. It's 1920 by 1080. That's the only option that XMG go for on this style of laptop, and it's a matte surface or a glossy surface. We've gone for matte here. Seems, in our opinion, it's always better when you're likely to be anywhere near a bright light source to go for the matte screen. So that's what we've got, and the 2.0 megapixel webcam is in the top edge of the screen, along with dual microphones, and just got the rubber bumpers along the edge of the screen, pretty standard for any laptop. And so yeah, that's the external part of the laptop, and we'll just close it, flip it over and open it up for you to let you see the inside. Here we have the XMG P703 gaming laptop partially opened up. Two panels off at the moment. They were really easy to remove. It was just a case of removing two screws and then they just lift out like that. Make upgrading pretty much idiot proof. So in here we've got the bottom of the optical drive. You just unscrew that and it would slide out. Maybe you've bought the DVD model and you want to upgrade to Blu-ray later on. Not a problem, just that one screw does it for you. Over here we've got the primary SATA port. So the drive that's in it at the moment is a Samsung 840 Pro 256GB model. Pretty much the best SSD you can buy at the moment, and to remove it you just lift up the tab here and it slides out. Simple as that. So that means that if you buy the mechanical model now, so maybe a 1TB drive or something like that in here, and you decide you want to move to an SSD for your boot drive later on, you can just pull out the mechanical drive, slide in an SSD, and it's ready to go once you've obviously put Windows on it. There is a second drive in here at the moment, a mechanical model, so we have got that extra storage in there. This main panel at the back here is where the rest of the components are, so you just slide it like that and then it lifts off. And what we have here is two cooling fans, as we said earlier on. They just exhaust air out here, and they're obviously drawing it in from the bottom. We've got a Haswell CPU in here, so that's the Intel 4th Gen chips, one of the new ones, and GeForce graphics over here. We'll go for that in a moment. There is a slot over here for an mSATA device, so you can add extra storage in there, or mini PCIe I guess you might want to call it. 2 sticks of Vengeance memory. XMG offer Vengeance memory, crucial memory, various different capacities. Up to 32GB can be installed in this system, and from what we could see, all the capacities that you can get are 1600 MHz. So it's just a case of which brand do you like, and maybe they have a little bit difference in timings and things like that, that you might prefer one over the other, but we've got Vengeance in here. The processor that we've got is a quad-core model with hyper-threading. It runs up to 3.7 GHz, and it's the i7-4800MQ. The models that you can get go from the 3.4 GHz 4700MQ right the way up to one that tops out at 3.9 GHz when it's turboing. Just checking, and that model is the 4930MX, so 3.0 to 3.9 GHz as I said, and that one's a 57 watt CPU, whereas this one here, the 4800, is 47 watts. So a little bit of variance in the CPU TDP, but not too much. Over at the left hand side we've got the GTX 770M graphics card. That's a Kepler based GPU, 3GB of video memory, and you can also upgrade to a GTX 780M. Again, that's Kepler based, and they up the memory on that one as well as a few of the other specifications to 4GB. So there's a little bit of a difference in the graphics that you can go for if you need that extra bit of gaming power. We'll show you later on in the video what exactly you get from the 770. But essentially that's the inside of the P703. Nicely laid out, nice tidy build, easy to get to the main components. It's just a case of unscrewing some screws. To get into this panel there were about think 5 screws, 2 at the back and then 3 across the surface here, and yeah, nice and simple to upgrade in the future. So what we're looking at here is just a few of the key components in the system, just as a reminder before we go on to performance testing. One of the things that I'd like to say just before getting onto that is we have a lot of graphs to get through initially, so things like CPU performance, memory performance, SATA performance, USB performance, all that sort of stuff coming first, power use, thermals, all that sort of stuff. So if you're interested in gaming only and you don't care how fast a drive runs in the system, that's fine. Jump forward to about 18.5 minutes and you should be straight into the gaming benchmarks, which include videos to break things up and things like that. So that's videos of this system actually gaming. And what we have for the key components, just as a reminder, is an i7-4800MQ CPU. So that's 4 cores, 8 threads because it's got hyperthreading, dual channel DDR3, so 8 gigs split into 2 4 gigs, that's Cas9. And we have the GTX 770M, which boosts up to 800 megahertz and memory is running at 1000. So the build that we get sent out by XMG is pretty basic, other than this one audio application which stands out from all the rest of the software. It gives us basic kind of equalizer settings. We can also go into VoiceFX, and that gives us things like robot voices, alien voices, orcs, all that sort of stuff. It allows you to change the way you sound when you're talking in game or on Skype or anything like that. We can also go into the effects and EQ tab, and that allows us to change the way that our virtual room sounds, or tailor the EQ for things like rock music or jazz or classical, anything like that, all pretty standard. Advanced settings lets us change the bass levels, but going back to scout mode, that's the key gaming feature from the X-Fi 3 software, and that boosts our audio in games so that we can hear enemies more clearly, and just gives us that little bit of an extra feature over standard onboard audio. So as we say, basic build, just this control panel, pretty much everything else is install Windows and throw it out the factory, just the way that it should be from XMG. So looking at performance now, we start off with SiSoft Sandra, and we're comparing through a chunk of this review with a desktop system. So this is the high-end Haswell chip, the 4770K, and we have that showing around about 20 points faster in one test and 10 to 12 on the other on SiSoft Sandra. So as we would expect, a mid-range mobile chip compared to the desktop chip, a little bit of a performance difference. In Cinebench, that translates to just over a point difference on the CPU. But what we need to take into account is if we have a CPU only on the desktop, that's going to give us about 30 points from the integrated GPU. The more powerful GeForce graphics in the laptop gives us about 60 points. But for gaming, that switches around a bit more because we can obviously install a discrete graphics card in the system, as we'll see later on. So what does that performance mean in real world use? Well, starting off with Media Expresso, which is giving us the ability to convert video for transferring to tablets and things like that, we see that there's around about a 10-second gap in performance between the desktop part and our notebook part. We could close that gap a little bit by going for the higher end i7 within the XMG. Costs a bit more, but that levels out performance. And just worth noting that this is using the Intel GPU for acceleration in Media Expresso. On music conversion, we're using an application which has the ability to use all 8 threads within our CPU. So we're seeing a 2 CD album in lossless quality converted to MP3 in around about 42 to 45 seconds. So only a 3-second difference between the notebook and the desktop part, which really in kind of day-to-day life is pretty much nothing. Moving on to video streaming. So this is us with a 4K clip streaming to the laptop and seeing how the CPU handles the playback of that clip. We can see that there's around about a 2% CPU use difference between desktop and notebook, which again is pretty much nothing. Both systems played the clip without issue, so that was great to see. And obviously we've got a nice screen on the XMG, so that good for viewing high definition content on. Moving to some of the component tests, we can see that SiSoft Sandra's memory benchmark shows that the dual channel 1600 megahertz memory in the XMG gives us around about 18 and a bit gigabytes a second of bandwidth. We can, of course, install faster memory on a desktop, and in this case it's 1866 megahertz, and that is running at 23 gigs a second on the desktop. So a little bit of a gap there doesn't have a huge impact on day-to-day performance. One of the other tests we've run is SATA 3 performance. So we've got the mechanical drive and the SSD within the XMG. Huge gap in performance obviously between the two, and the thing that's worth noting is that the XMG's SSD, that's the Samsung 840 Pro, is running right up at just a touch faster than the Vertex drive in our desktop system that we used as a comparison there. USB performance, again impressive from the XMG, so competing well again with the desktop system, and we get very, very similar read performance from our USB 3 drive, and in fact the XMG just nudges ahead on the write operations, so about 10 megabytes a second faster on the XMG. Finishing off the component tests for now, we have the mini PCIe slot, or mSATA, whatever you want to call it, in the laptop, and we've installed one of the Plextor M5M drives in there, and you can see that compared to a desktop system which also has an mSATA slot, we have very, very similar performance, so no kind of performance penalty for moving to from a desktop to a notebook system. As one final little performance test, we ran PCMark 8, which should be out any day now from FutureMark. We're running the home profile on this benchmark and setting it to the default setting for OpenCL, which means it runs on the CPU, and the notebook gives us 3,848 points. And when the benchmark comes out, that will then allow you to run it on your own system, compare, see how much faster or slower the XMG is than your own system. Also built into the new PCMark 8 suite is a battery test, and essentially it runs the benchmark suite over and over, records the how the battery runs out over time, and then reports to you at the end how long it has lasted for. So this is a mix of document editing, web browsing, and a little bit of web calling, and also some gaming, just all mixed together. So that takes us on to power use, where we have quite a difference in performance between a desktop and a notebook system. That's no surprise. The XMG idles at 39 watt and tops out at 179 watt when both the CPU and the GPU are running at 100% load, and that is in comparison to a desktop. So that's a standard i7-4700MQ with a discrete GPU, runs about 105 up to over 200 watts. So a little power saving on the notebook. Thermal performance from the XMG was also pretty good. So idles around 35 to 40 on the different components. The CPU tops out at 80 Celsius and the GPU at 73. That's the GeForce GPU, of course, and the noise level was just a touch over 50 decibels. Now that is comparable to a desktop graphics card, say a 17970 high-end graphics card, and that is of course not the noise level that's on all of the time, just when we're really pushing the system. Overall, it's a pretty quiet system, just other than 100% load. So that takes us on to 3D Mark Firestrike. Another little comparison here, just the notebook with the 770M versus a desktop with a GTX 770. Obviously, there's quite a big gap in performance there, but we would expect that from a really high-end discrete GPU on the desktop. Still a respectable score, though, from the XMG. And let's take a look at how that impacts actual real-world gaming. So we're starting with Dota 2. We're running at 1920 by 1080, and that's with maximum detail, so everything turned on within the game control panel. And we can see we average at 61 frames per second, and we're dropping down to 29 at the lowest point, so nice smooth gameplay. And here's a little video showing how the game performed on the P703. So that brings us to grid 2. Again, we're on 1920 by 1080, the native resolution of the display, and maximum detail, so that's ultra. And we also were able to turn on 8 times anti-aliasing in this test, and still play with completely smooth frame rates. It does drop down to 26, but no noticeable stutters when we were gaming. And here is again some gaming performance on the XMG for you to see.
We're here to do one thing: turn those on the fence into die-hard fans. Hit your targets and watch the fans roll in.
Moving to Tomb Raider, again we're at 1920 by 1080, which is great to see, ultra detail. So there is a step up from that, which is Ultimate, and that turns on fancy hair effects for Lara Croft. That was something that we weren't able to use on the XMG, but otherwise all the detail settings at high, no anti-aliasing for this test. So an average of 47 dropping to 33, and here's a run round a multiplayer map to see how that looks. So to finish things off on the performance front, we have Metro Last Light, and we're again running at 1920 by 1080 and maximum detail. That's excluding anti-aliasing, but we do have PhysX on, and we see 32 average, 26 minimum, and 47 maximum. So a nice end result for the XMG P703. And here's a little look at some gameplay from Metro.
Power's working. Open the gate. I'll cover the passage. Great. You did fine after all. All clear. Move out. All right. The map shows a collector entry point ahead. Go right. There's a dead end on the left.
Hi there. So before we go on to concluding the article, just a few things to go over that are probably come under a little bit of performance or general use of the system. And the first one is how long it takes to come back from sleep. So if we just hit the power button here just now, it's been in sleep for a few minutes. And you can see that it takes maybe 2 or 3 seconds to come back on. Back to the desktop, and as we mentioned before, there's an LED panel here that lights up when there's sound playing, so we'll just run a music track. You can see how much it lights up and how it works. So just to kind of finish off on that front, we'll restart the system and you can see how long it takes to power off and power on again while I'm talking. So overall, in terms of the build quality of the P703, it's pretty nice, solidly built system. The soft touch coating both on the palm area and round on the lid is really nicely applied, gives it that little extra feel that takes away the plasticness that you sometimes get from laptops. That was it just rebooting there just now. It's a nice solid hinge on it, so it's holding it exactly where you leave it. There's a nice bit of resistance on there. Viewing angles are pretty decent. There's not really any issue with them. If you're using it just for yourself, it's pretty much perfect. And there's also good quality parts inside, so you've got your Samsung SSD, Seagate hard drives, Hitachi is one of the other options. There's the option for a killer NIC, and you have, that's on wireless anyway, you have Corsair memory, Crucial memory, all those sorts of things, and there's also a really good selection on the SATA front as well. So you've got the Plextor M5M as one example, which is probably the best SATA SSD that we've tested so far. And of course you've got your NVIDIA GTX 770M or 780M graphics that are in there, and a good selection of Intel Haswell CPUs as well. Things that probably could be improved about the system, a lot of them are very common between quite a lot of laptops. So the USB ports down the side, for example, it would be just nicer if they were a little bit further apart, so that if you've got a nice big chunky USB drive, something like that, then you would have that extra bit of space down the side there. And not so much an issue for the LAN port because it's obviously a small connector, but these three here. On the opposite side you do have one on its own, so you could use that for larger devices. And the audio ports are all nicely spaced out and just a little bit away from that, so that shouldn't be an issue over there. Sound wise, you heard a little bit of it there. It doesn't come across great on camera, but it's a decent sound quality, and it's not probably the best that we've heard from a laptop, but it is pretty good. As we say in a lot of laptop reviews though, it'll get you by when you're maybe sitting about somewhere, taking it to a hotel room or anything like that, but for actual gaming or proper media use, you'll want to have your own decent set of headphones just to plug into it and get the extra level of quality from there. The lighting bar, you're going to love it or hate it. We probably fall somewhere towards hating, but it's not hugely distracting. It's kind of interesting, I guess, but it's there will be people who want to turn that off, and that's quite understandable. The same goes for the current trackpad that we've got on here. It's nice and responsive, but the logo with the dot and the two wings on it isn't great. Good thing is that from the near future, because this is just an early build, the newer builds of the XMG machines are going to have the XMG logo on it, and I would imagine that will go for the boot screen and things like that as well. So early sample, just to get a Haswell sample out in the wild, so a few little things not quite there that will be on the finished product. And other than that, it's actually a pretty decent system, not any heavier than you'd expect from this type of machine. It's got a nice finish overall, and yeah, pretty good. The key point obviously though is performance, and that's where we saw that it was actually quite competitive with the desktop system. So we ran this up against the highest spec i7-4700MQ desktop CPU, and yes, this fell behind a little bit, but again, this isn't the highest spec mobile Haswell chip. It competed really well. In real world use, you're talking maybe a few seconds when you're converting an album, or 30 seconds or so if you're converting a really long video between the desktop system and this one. When we look at the individual components, so the SSD and USB 3 and things like that, this machine completely capable of keeping up with the desktop system based on Z87, so that was great. And the battery life is also pretty good for a desktop replacement. When you're buying a system like this with a high-end i7 and a GTX 770 or 780M in here, you don't expect long battery life. That's just the way that it is. Obviously when you're at the desktop, it's running on the Intel 4600 GPU, and if you were to run, say, Media Expresso to convert video, it's using that to use GPU acceleration. But for gaming, you're getting that GTX 770 or 780, and overall, the gaming was actually quite impressive, even with the 770. So we were able to game all the things we tested at 1920 by 1080, so the native resolution of the system. Ultra detail, maximum detail, whatever you want to call it, in all of the games that we tested. The only things that we had to just tweak a little bit were that in Tomb Raider we couldn't turn on TressFX, so no fancy here on Lara Croft, and in a couple of the games, so Metro and Tomb Raider, we had to disable anti-aliasing because it was just too much of a performance hit to remain playable. But in Dota 2 and in Grid 2 there was no problem with anti-aliasing. In fact, in Grid 2 we were running at 8 times anti-aliasing with ultra detail, and everything ran really smoothly. And probably one of the biggest things about the performance of the system is that all the footage you saw earlier on of Grid and Metro and all that sort of stuff was running on this system, playing it and recording it all on the same machine. So it wasn't like we were streaming off to another machine that was recording it. This system was handling all of that without any problem, still getting decent frame rates, and that's pretty great. So pricing wise, it comes in at just under 1,200 in its default configuration, so that's with i7, with GTX 770, with 4 gigs of memory. It would be nice if the default configuration came with a drive that had a cache in it, so like a hybrid drive, SSD, mechanical hybrid. And just to give it that little extra boost in performance, you can obviously add your own SSD at any point. We saw how easy it was earlier on to do that. But comes with a 2-year warranty as standard, so that's pretty decent for a high-end system. Most people would get a 1 year and then you'd have to pay for that extra second year, but that's not the case with XMG. So overall, recommended system. It does everything that we needed off it. It was great for productivity, really good for gaming. Wasn't too loud. I mean, the loudness levels, we registered just over 50 decibels at sort of the distance I am from it just now, so that's similar level to, say, a high-end 7970 graphics card. That was something that we registered at 50 decibels recently. So different noise profile because one's in the case and one's not, obviously, but it gives you an idea that it's essentially the same noise as a high-end graphics card coming from your laptop. And yeah, ease of upgrades, performs really well, good price, good warranty, can't really complain. So another system which is highly recommended from XMG. If you want to head over to the website, we've got a gallery of the system, so some nice images just so you can see it in a little bit more detail, and we've also got a written conclusion, so anything that we missed on this video we'll just pop it in there. And thanks for watching, and remember to subscribe to see some more upcoming Haswell content, and yeah, thanks for watching.